Alright, today guys and gals, sorry for being gone, but as I mentioned to you before, we are going to be going over cells, but if you have any questions on the body organizations packet, which is due tomorrow, make sure you try to find me today. I'll be at it or end around school, or you can stop on in first thing tomorrow if you have any questions on something. But what you're going to go through today is you're going to start taking a look at cells. Now, hopefully all of this stuff you kind of remember, at least have an idea of from when we were in sophomore biology and we talked about cells and how they do work. So we're going to start looking at advancing on our material. We're going to talk about that the human body is going to consist of more than 75 trillion cells. And all of those cells are going to vary in size and shape. But based upon their structure and function, they're going to have particular jobs. Now, the size of a red blood cell is going to be very different from the size of a white blood cell. Do different things. The size of a white blood cell is going to be different from that of a neuron, which is going to be different from a heart cell, which is different from a muscle cell, which is different from, skin cells, different from bone cells. So they all have particular functions, meaning the physiology based upon their shape. Now, when you look at the differences in their cellular shape, you can take a look at some of the differences then in their functions. Okay, what their job, what they actually entail and do. Now here's a quick illustration. If you can kind of think about what these guys are. This little guy right there, obviously it's red, so it kind of gives it away. This is a small cell in the human body, which is a red blood cell, an RBC. Just below that is a WBC, a white blood cell. RBC scientific name, or red blood cell scientific name, is erythrocyte. Here, scientific term for a white blood cell, leukocyte. You guys ever heard of leukemia? This is the cancer of the white blood cells. And then you get two other cells here. Obviously, look very different from those little circular cells. This guy is actually the largest cell. This big one is the largest cell in the human body, in particular, ladies. This is one that you have. This is the egg. Okay. One below it is actually lacking striations. This one is a muscle cell that you cannot control. This guy is smooth muscle. Okay. Just by looking at it. Obviously, these are only 4 different types of cells. There's going to be a heck of a lot more other cells that we're going to talk about if the bodies contain over 75 trillion of them. Now, yes, there may be 75 trillion of them, but all cells in the human body contain at least 3 parts, or at least one point in time they had all 3 parts. Those 3 parts include the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and the cell membrane. All those 3 parts, they're going to have particular functions. With the cytoplasm, the organelles are going to, inside the cytoplasm, you're going to have those organelles, those tiny little structures, little organs that are going to be doing particular functions. So as we work our way through, let's focus in on a actual cell. Now, this guy, you will not actually have to label. You won't have to worry about labeling him at all, but there will be a matching section on your test that'll say, all right, nucleus matched up with its appropriate definition. The ribosome matched up with its appropriate definition. I believe there's probably 12 of those, and I think that usually on this next test is probably one of the more difficult parts, so we're going to have to do a pretty good job of trying to remember what they do entail. But if we take a look at our first thing, okay, I told you that they're going to contain at least 3 parts: cell membrane, cytoplasm, which is going to contain all the organelles, along with the cell membrane, and then the nucleus. Those are the 3 parts that all of them have, or at least had at one point. Now, the job of the cell membrane is to help regulate movement of materials into and out of the cell. Now, if you can think back a long time ago, again, sophomore biology, we talked about the cell membrane being a phospholipid bilayer. We have this lipid structure. Those are our phosphates. We got a big protein in the middle, and we got more phosphate groups. In between there, you've got these little tails. Those are the lipid tails. Now, the job of a cell membrane, if this is inside the cell, this is out, is to allow certain particles to move their way through. Sometimes these little particles can move their way through this way, but if they're too big, they need help, and they got to go in these big doors. I always mention it like myself. Big guy, I'm going to have a hard time fitting through a small door. For example, a doggy door. Might be fun to watch, but it's going to be very difficult to do. So I need a larger door. And this large door, what that is right there, is a protein. Okay, that protein is going to help allow certain things to go into, so it's going to have a particular fit. So what we say that is a technique or a particular function. We call that selectively permeable. Selectively permeable, which just means that it's choosy. It selects certain things to transfer into and out of the cell. Okay. Sometimes the cell even has little hair-like projections that are going to branch off of it. Those little hair-like projections be kind of sticking off like this, known as villi, which helps to stick and land on things, which will increase the surface area. So that's going back to this guy here. This villi, it's going to help increase that surface area. Moving our way along, we're going to take a little bit more about that cell structure. So it is going to consist of that double layer of phospholipids. So you saw that just a second ago. We were drawing that. We had the phospholipids, one layer on the bottom, one on the top, and in the middle is the fats. So phosphate, lipid, phosphate. So a phospholipid bilayer, and you can kind of see the separation point in between there. Those two layers on top of each other. We call it also a fat sandwich. Sandwich in between. The heads, which are our phosphate groups, are polar. The tails, blue doesn't work very well, are non-polar. Those of you who've had chemistry, remember that non-polar hates water. Polar loves water. So you consider polar is hydrophilic and non-polar hydrophobic. So now we consider this itself what's called the fluid mosaic model. Now, I'm only showing you three little phosphate groups. If we move on to the next slide, you can take a look. If you really zoom in on this, you really kind of zoom in, you can see each of those individual circles in here. Okay? Each of those circles has those phosphate groups attached onto it all the way throughout. And then here's the phosphate groups below, has the more of those lines on it. These are the lipids. Okay, and somewhere in there you might see a big groove, and that big groove is going to be a protein. Obviously, you can't really see it right in there. There may be other spots where you find it. Now, I'm going to zoom back out. It almost looks like a whole bunch of Dippin' Dots all together. Here's a big protein. This big structure right there, a globular protein, if I'm a huge molecule like C6H12O6, I can't just fit through those tiny little cracks. I need a big door to get through. There's my big door, my big protein. Okay? Now notice there is no real order to all those globular proteins, so that's why they consider it that mosaic. So if I went back to the last slide, you saw that fluid mosaic model. There's your fluid mosaic model. So that's what this is talking about. A whole bunch of stuff just kind of garbled in, thrown together to make it look kind of all clunky. All right. Moving our way along, the second thing, number 2, that we're going to find in every one of our cells is cytoplasm. Now, in the cytoplasm, you are going to have the materials, these little organelles that have particular functions, and those functions are going to allow the cell to do their job. So the cytoplasm itself, though, is a clear liquid. It's just going to suspend. Think of it like your Jell-O that you have during Thanksgiving. And you have some of those little mandarin oranges stuck in the middle. This is basically a clear liquid that's going to allow those organelles to keep three-dimensional shape and to move around the cell. Inside the cytoplasm, we are going to have multiple organelles. One of them, ER. Okay, ER, endoplasmic reticulum, and there are 2 different types of them. If it does contain ribosomes, it is considered rough. Rough ribosomes. Without, it is smooth ER. So if it does not have them, its job is to make and transport lipids. So if I'm going to just symbolize this, I'm going to have RER, so rough ER, protein, meaning it makes proteins, and transports proteins. SER, smooth ER, is fats, makes fats or synthesizes fats. Synthesize means the same as making, and transports them. Okay, so the rough ER, smooth ER, job is to transport the highway of the cell, but if it has ribosomes, ribosomes' jobs are just simply to make proteins. So if you have ribosomes on the transport system, then it's going to make proteins and transport those. Without the ribosomes, it's just going to make fats and transport the fats. Now, if I look down at the bottom, it's just looking at the ribosome itself. Okay, the ribosome itself. Here's, zoom out to the side. You can see that the ribosome, again, is found throughout the cell. Its job is to make protein. Here's just a quick illustration to see a separation point, the difference between them. All the little dots make it rough, and on the other side, the right-hand side, you can see how it's smooth. A couple of the organelles we're going to look at real quickly. One being the Golgi apparatus, or Golgi body. Its job is to package. Package. I think if you think back to your analogies you had software biology, you might have talked about this as your mail packaging center. Okay, this might have been your UPS store, not necessarily your UPS truck, but your store. Now, the store packages the material that was made by a ribosome, into the trucks. So the vesicle is an actual truck or a delivery service. Now the highway it's going to transport system on is going to be, again, we just talked about it. You can see the ER, you can see the different portions of the cytoskeleton later on that is going to help transport through. Mitochondria, their job is to be the powerhouse. They're one of the cells, and in particular, in our body, in the Animalia eukaryote, are the only one that has their own DNA, meaning that they can divide whenever they well please. Here's a quick illustration that looks at the structure of a mitochondria. Its job is to use these little inner folds later on to make energy. And that's something that's more of an advanced biology topic. We're not going to talk a whole lot about it. A few more organelles that you want to make sure you take some notes on. One being lysosomes. Lyso is, think of it like Lysol that you might have at your house. It's used to help clean up kind of your garbage disposals, to get rid of things. You're having microfilaments, which is allowing your cell to have its three-dimensional shape. You can think of it kind of like your skeleton. You know, when you look at a microscope from the top down, it doesn't look three-dimensional, but it actually is. And these microfilaments and microtubules allow it to have three dimension, to allow that cytoplasm to suspend the organelles and not be considered flat. And then the centrosome, only found in animal cells. Its job is to go apart and pull apart chromosomes during cell division. Let's just kind of shrink this up quick. So if you remember your cell, let's do this. We had a big cell, we had a structure over here, and let's just put it in metaphase. Later on, we'll see that. The job, this guy right there and right here, those are the centrioles. Okay, the centriole's job, which is again the same as the centrosome, to pull apart, get ready during mitosis to pull apart chromosomes during cell division. And the last two I think we're going to talk about today, the last two we're going to see as the cilia and flagella. Their entire job is for movement. We're going to have cilia found throughout the entire body, found like in the respiratory tract. So if you guys have been sick recently, you've known that you've coughed up some mucus and you're able to get rid of that. If we didn't have cilia there, that mucus would stay trapped inside your lungs. Think of people with emphysema. People that smoke heavily and have emphysema lose cilia, so that stuff stays down in the respiratory tract. You have cilia lining the reproductive tract in terms of females, the fallopian tubes, to help propel the egg down to the endometrium, to align, help fertilize that egg down into then that inner lining of the uterus, so a child can be starting to develop. There's only one cell in the human body that has this one here, the flagellum, and that is our sperm cell. So males are the only ones that have that flagellum, that whip-like tail that's going to propel the sperm throughout the female tract and allow for fertilization. Okay, that is just a quick look at some of the structures of the cilia, and then here the flagellum, this particular long whip-like tail. And the last one, which I think we'll get back to in our next slide, so you can go ahead and move on to the next movie, is that of the nucleus. So we'll actually start here, which is our number 3 that all cells are going to contain, is the nucleus. So we'll start here in just a minute. So you can go ahead and click on the next slide.